Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Concordia Annual Summit. It's so great to have you here. I love seeing how much energy there is in this room with regards to this particular topic. We know that UNGA provides, or the UN General Assembly provides, a lot of information that saturates the headlines, the stories, the meetings. Everyone is busy. Everyone has a variety of policy priorities to advance this week. It's an exciting time to be here in New York. I'm very pleased that we get to start today's summit off with this kind of grounding conversation to discuss what really matters amidst all that noise. The Global Flourishing Study, a multi-year study designed in partnerships with Harvard, Baylor, others, and funded by the John Templeton Foundation and conducted by Gallup, has recently released some very insightful information to answer that very question. And I'm thrilled to be positioned alongside John and Tim to talk about some of those findings and what it really means in terms of how we go about our day-to-day. So, excited for this conversation. I do encourage everyone to use the QR code to ask questions. I'll be fielding them with our little handy-dandy iPad. We want to make this a conversation. This is about us as a society. So, Tim, we'll start off with you. The study shows that religious service attendance is consistently linked with higher levels of well-being across countries. I believe 64 countries, 22 countries? 22 countries and territories. The importance of these religious service attendants, this engagement at that level. How do you interpret this finding, and what does it suggest about the role of meaning, purpose, and community?
Well, first of all, honored to be here, and while the John Templeton Foundation was the lead funder on this, other Templeton entities, the Templeton World Charity Foundation, Templeton Religion Trust, came alongside, together about $25 million that was put into this study, which is a sprawling and vast study, by far the broadest and deepest, most multi-dimensional study of human flourishing ever conducted. Over 200,000 people in those 22 different countries, plus some other territories as well. And one of the signature takeaways so far is just that the economic measures of well-being do not necessarily correlate with what you might call social and moral or humanistic shapers of well-being, and that includes religious attendance and religious community. Religious community is strongly correlated with greater self-assessments of human flourishing. And I don't think it should be surprising, and this is where I want to be careful about what we know and what we don't know, and this is a social scientific study, and we want to stick with the science. So what the science shows us is that strong correlation. It strongly suggests causation. But this is a study that will be conducted over 5 waves. It will be longitudinal, and John could say more about that. And we'll get a much clearer sense of causation as we see that longitudinal study. But I think many of us can attest that participation in religious services in religious community provides a sort of bonding agent for families, neighborhoods, communities, provides a cohesive sense of purpose and meaning in life. That seems to be one of the strongest drivers of this kind of general multidimensional sense of human flourishing.
A quick follow-up question. Those 5 waves, are they annual?
John?
Yeah, so what we did, this is really interesting and very difficult to pull off, but we recruited panels in these 20 some odd countries so that we could go back on each one of these waves and interview people to see how things have changed. And again, to your point, Hannah, or Timothy, I should say, is that this gets us a lot closer to proving causality. Because every time that there's a study in the world on well-being or happiness, we can do various demographic cuts, we can ask them other questions, but we can't get really close to saying, did that actually cause the change in the person's life that made them feel better about life? And I think that's what is such a big deal. So that's what we're doing, and we just launched the first results, and we're hoping to do this a lot longer and in a lot more countries.
I love it. We do have a question from the audience that I'm going to take to right that, because somebody asked what it would take to scale this research further for the whole world or more countries. So how do we take your hope to do that? What does that take?
Honestly, there's one barrier, it's money.
Okay.
And I think this is one of the great reasons that there are so many data.
So money can find the solution to happiness. Is what
That's a big question. But you know, what's so remarkable, if you look at the SDGs and the indicators that are used to measure progress. So of course there are 17 SDGs. I think there are now 250 some odd indicators. If you look in just Africa, 60% of the indicators that are used to measure progress, there is no data for them. And the single reason is just, it's a barrier, is money. And look, I don't blame a lot of these international institutions. When money's tight, the first place the money goes is not investing in good data. The money goes to getting food, to getting bed nets so that people don't get infected with various diseases. So it's not like anyone's doing anything wrong, but the money's just not there. In this particular effort, in order to recruit, think about what we're doing. We go and knock on doors in all these countries, some call and the others, and we're asking them, hey, can we just call you at any time, kind of for the rest of your life? It's so difficult because not a lot of people want to participate. So that means that we have people walking the planet, and we have to pay them for every hour that they're doing it, recruiting individuals so that we can call them back. So it's millions and millions of dollars, and thankfully, Templeton has been so bold as to help pay for a lot of this. But yeah, there's a lot more money, and the world desperately needs this information. World leaders can't operate in the dark, and that's what they're doing in so many countries.
I think that's a great point. I want to speak a bit to the younger generation. How the data reveals that, I mean, they're struggling. The kids are not all right at the moment, as this is indicating. And so I want to speak a little bit about the patterns that stood out in the data and what they tell us about how societies are or aren't meeting the needs of this next generation.
Go ahead.
Well, kind of the big headline finding, it has to do with what's called the U-curve of happiness. Now, for those of you that don't know what the U-curve is when we look at age, when we do this study and we ask people to rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is the worst possible life, 10 is the best, where do you stand today? When you're about 18, 19, or 20, you respond to that question, you go, 8, 9, 10, life's awesome. But as life goes on and you hit about your 50s, you start to go, 5. Some 50-year-olds got a laugh out of that. And then what's so remarkable is that the older you get, the higher you rate your life. So when you get into your 70s and 80s, you start to reflect on the rest of your life and you say, gosh, that was worth it. I'm a 9 or I'm a 10. And in fact, so if you look at the data, it looks like a U. In fact, some say it's a graph that's smiling at you, hence the U-curve of happiness. But what we're so worried about is our research now shows that U-curve is bending in the wrong direction, meaning young people aren't rating their lives so highly like they used to. It's a significant finding, and it's got us really concerned.
Quick, very informal and non-scientific poll. U-curve. Raise of hands if you're feeling it in the 8, 9, or 10 arena this morning. Okay. Some energy towards Anga. In the 4 to 7 range. Okay. There's coffee for that. 1 to 3. All right. Okay. We'll try to keep away from that for the rest of the day, too. So I liked how we talked about how, or John, how you mentioned that policymakers can't operate in the dark without this data. And that's why this data is so important when you're actually thinking about leadership and governance and policies. So Tim, Templeton has really, for a long time, explored the deeper dimensions of human purpose. And how can policymakers and institutions support flourishing in ways that go beyond economic growth or material wealth, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, Sir John Templeton really valued the way in which natural sciences and social sciences can cast new light or bring new information into the oldest questions known to humankind, right? Mm-hmm. And this is fundamentally one of the oldest questions known to humankind. What does it really mean to be human? What does it really mean to be a fully flourishing human being and live a good life? So we're interested in this from that sort of fundamental questions standpoint. And a study like this isn't necessarily going to prescribe certain kinds of policy interventions. Mm-hmm. It might, however, create fertile ground, informational ground for reflection on the part of civic organizations, civil society, government organizations that care about not just economic well-being, but a really full-orbed, multi-dimensional well-being amongst their communities and their people. Clearly, the struggle amongst younger generations is something that we all need to wrestle with. And particularly on relational measures of well-being, younger generations today are struggling. I think creating pathways to spiritual meaning for people, understanding that putting aside epistemological or ontological questions about religious belief, it is clearly the case that participation in religious services provides a good deal of meaning and purpose and a sense of identity and a sense of community. So I think whether you're talking about, in many cases it was the middle income countries that so far are showing the highest ratings of full spectrum flourishing. So countries like Mexico and the Philippines and Indonesia are actually coming out on the top. Now some of those middle economic income countries I think can look at ways of developing that don't leave those forms of flourishing behind in the ways that some of the economically most advanced countries seem to have left those things behind and are struggling on those measures.
Interesting. I just really want to unpack that a little bit further because I think it's important to understand that there are these elements of causation but not, or correlation but not causation between the economics of pieces. And I wonder just how much this human bonding element that we all as a society went through for several years during COVID, the relationship sets there with the spiritual or the religious elements that you're finding here. I just think that's fascinating. I mean, it turns out we're not all better off when we're just isolated in our own spaces, and so much of these indicators of wealth, seem to do that, right? I mean, we're behind screens all the time, and so.
Yeah, that's right. So there are probably people in this room who can think about ways to advance economic flourishing while at the same time weaving more tightly together the social and moral cultural fabric that holds us together as a culture and as a community.
Mm-hmm. And again, noting that culture, community, moral values, these are not homogenous across different countries, which is why, again, that expanded research to better understand how this fits on a global stage is very important. It can't be, what's working in Mexico might not work elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And already these 22 countries reflect about 64% of the world's population.
Right.
So it is
a
already
big study.
reaching a really vast number of people. And only Gallup really has the scale and the capacity to do that kind of work.
Thank you.
And I think that's a great point. So John, in terms of Gallup, how would you like to see people use this study? I mean, why do you create these types of data awareness? In terms of how you might see governments, companies, communities using this, applying this in their decision making?
It's amazing because Simon Kuznets, he often gets credited with being the one that created GDP, at least when he approached America's Congress and said, hey, we ought to have an indicator so that we can understand if the economy is growing or contracting. But while he was there that day testifying, he also said, but don't use this as a measure for understanding if people's lives are going well.
Does that get left out in the historical?
Well, I think a lot of times, despite the fact that we know that human beings are not automatons, oftentimes we look to data and perceive them as such. And we don't see or look for data that say or answer the question, are their lives actually getting better? And I think this allows policymakers to say maybe not through the lens of are we investing more or is GDP rising? Because what we know is that if GDP rises, it doesn't mean people's lives got better necessarily. And of course, we've heard that example where if you build a prison in the middle of a community, GDP will rise, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people's lives got better. But these are indicators so that they can watch to see if policy actually help improve the lives that they're actually trying to affect.
The Concordia Summit touches policy, investment, market-led solutions. We'll be talking over the next 3 days about a variety of topics, but at the end of the day, I think what's most important is that we're talking and connecting on this. So again, circling back to these human bond elements, I just hope that everyone here just takes a moment introduces themselves to the person next to them and starts to connect not as an automaton, but as a real whole human. So with that, I will just say thank you so much, Tim, for your leadership in making sure that we are able to conduct this study and gain very insightful information to support us as a global community. And John, for your team for going out and doing the collecting.
Thank you.
That's great. All right, thank you so much.